Welcome to the walkthrough talk-through for the team development program. This is our next module, and we are doing a little bit of a pivot in the program. Just to very quickly recalibrate, this was the original development of the program, taking a look at a deep dive into the DISC tool, then moving into how teams develop, where we started to take a look at the team development survey. Then moving into managing our teams through change, where we focused on trust and trust building with the 4 building blocks of trust. And then last time around, taking a look at understanding our intrinsic or internal motivators for our teams. As a matter of fact, that was the interim assignment from last time where we did the exercise around oxygen poker. And I encouraged everybody to use that same exercise, that same activity with each of your teams in order to uncover what their internal or intrinsic motivators are. This program, however, as I mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of a pivot here. First, today, we're going to take a look at a deeper dive into the concept of psychological safety. This was also something that we did touch on here in Module 2. In addition, we are also adding a module around what we call connection conversations. And we'll be taking a look at those after the first of the year, just in time for setting up our people for the year around development and making sure that we are doing everything we can to help them succeed. But for today, we are going to jump back a little bit, touch on what we touched on back in Module 2 around psychological safety. As a matter of fact, if you remember, when we did start to take a look at the concept of psychological safety, it was done in the context of the Tuckman model, which started to take a look at how teams develop, how they come together. First, we acknowledge that teams move into a forming stage where they first get to know each other, expectations, goals. Then it's not uncommon once we get into the work, maybe we have a little bit of conflict, disagreement, or what Tuckman calls storming. Hopefully, we're able to talk through it in a constructive manner. And then we start to establish these rules of engagement that usually speak to how we are going to get to the work together. This was referred to as norming. Once we've got those norms in place, what we generally find is production or performing tends to pick up. We're able to achieve those results. We're able to accomplish goals. And then because the only constant in business is change, stage 5, transforming or reforming on teams, was also discussed. This tool took a look at the process in which teams develop. We also acknowledged that according to Project Aristotle, which was a study done by Google, and then further acknowledged by Amy Edmondson, that psychological safety is one of the key components for a high-performing team. And as a result, we wanted to take a deeper look at this idea of psychological safety. And really, what does it mean for us as managers? How can we use it in order to better manage and lead our teams? So first, in this module, we took a look at the definition of psychological safety and just acknowledge that it is the belief that no one will be punished, humiliated, ridiculed, singled out for being able to contribute, for speaking up, whether it be sharing ideas, asking questions, or candidly, even making mistakes. In order to start illustrating some of this, we ended up moving into a group exercise where small groups started to share examples where they didn't necessarily feel psychologically safe. I asked each participant to share the situation, identify what caused you to feel your safety being threatened, and how could that situation have been handled a little bit more effectively. After everybody did this in small breakouts, we ended up coming back to the larger session where we started to debrief some of this and really use it as a way to start addressing the concept of psychological safety. We did this under the guise of a tool that was originally outlined by Timothy R. Clark. And he explains the 4 stages of psychological safety. In a nutshell, as a manager, one of the things that I want to be able to do in order to connect with folks and be able to establish that sense of psychological safety is being able to demonstrate a certain amount of respect for their contribution, for their opinion, for the value they provide. In addition, I also want to make sure that I'm providing a certain amount of permission, or really empowerment, allowing people to participate. These two key drivers are essential when it comes to establishing that environment of psychological safety on our teams. And so we started to discuss this in a little bit more detail, stating that really everybody on a team contributes to psychological safety. As a matter of fact, one of the ways to think about it is that the team is a petri dish. And as a manager, as a leader, what am I doing in order to help manage that petri dish? Well, focusing on these two elements, both respect and permission, start to give me that capability. As a matter of fact, before I'm even on a team, I might not necessarily feel psychological safety because I'm just not a participant. This begins once I am invited to participate on the team. If I am invited to participate and I don't get the respect or the permission, I start to feel a sense of exclusion. I might start to feel like an outsider. Might even feel as if I was only invited to the team in name only, or perhaps even by default. Maybe it feels like I was being made, or you were being made to include me on the team. But hopefully, as a manager, I help to facilitate, I help to harbor some of that psychological safety by providing respect for somebody's contribution and at the same time allowing them to participate. When I start to do this, I start to develop what's called inclusion safety. Now, inclusion safety allows me to start to feel a part of the group. The reason why I am included is because I have worth. It is not necessarily an evaluation of worthiness. As a matter of fact, the only reason not to include someone in this stage is because they might cause harm to the team. If you think about this in terms of sports, playing on a sports team, if you have ever felt that you didn't get picked, if you will, then you are not being included. Once I get picked on the team, then usually I start to feel some of this inclusion safety, where really the only qualifications are to be human and harmless. Well, then hopefully I continue to feel that sense of respect, that sense of acknowledgement for my value, and I am given opportunity to participate. And as a result, I start to develop what is called learner safety. Learner safety is where I get to engage. I get to focus on discovery. I can ask questions, I can experiment, I can make mistakes and even learn from them. During this stage, I am now an active participant. As a matter of fact, in the inclusion safety stage, I can remain passive. But in learner safety, this only occurs as people exert themselves. So do I feel as if I get to exert myself, make errors, and learn from them? Are they treated as mistakes, or are they treated as now we know what to do differently next time? Is it viewed as a failure, or is it viewed as progress? Going back to that sports analogy, if inclusion safety stated that I got picked to be on the team, now in learner safety, I feel like I get to practice. I've got the playbook and I can learn the plays along the way. Hopefully, that respect and that permission element continues, and now I start to develop what is called contributor safety. In contributor safety, I feel like I can really perform the work, add value. Now, there's usually certain boundaries or expectations associated with this. It's not that I just contribute in any way willy-nilly, but rather there is a goal that I get to participate in trying to contribute towards. The practice in the learning stage allows me the confidence and the capability to contribute here in the contributor stage. Some of the questions that I might ask myself is, does my manager engage and respond to what I am contributing? Or do they lack empathy? Do they ignore my contributions? Here, if we go back to the sports analogy, now I get to get playing time. I get put into the game. As this level of safety continues to develop, it does happen in a progressive fashion. Usually that progression is based on these three elements. First, I get to contribute at a task level. Second, I get to contribute at a process level. And then third, I get to contribute at an outcome level. I'll give you a quick example. I grew up in the restaurant industry and I was a bartender. When I first got to be a bartender, my manager allowed me to make certain drinks, mix drinks for guests. In addition, I also got to set up the bar or perhaps even cut garnish, but it was very task oriented. As I continued to show capability in this area, then I got assigned, I got delegated certain processes. For example, now I got to open and close the bar. I got to do inventory or perhaps even ordering. And then as I continued to build up more and more capability and confidence, then I got to focus on contributing at an outcome level. And this is where I got to start to manage the P&L for the bar and become more of a bar manager. So when you think about contributor safety, there is usually a progressive fashion that occurs. Hopefully that continues to the level with which I get to reach challenger safety. When we have challenger safety on a team, this is really the ability to be candid in creating constructive dissent. This isn't necessarily disagreeing for disagreement's sake, but rather, can I disagree? Can I debate? Can I challenge the status quo for the better? Clark refers to this as speaking truth to power. And so as a manager, what I've got to be able to do is give my people a certain amount of cover, if you will, so that they feel as if they can be candid. If you want to encourage challenger safety, do you recognize the first time that someone debates with you? As a matter of fact, are you willing to be wrong? Are you willing to be wrong in public? This is where true innovation can really start to occur on teams. Do we seek out differences and ideally try and reduce that feeling of ridicule when those differences might get surfaced? If I continue along the lines of that sports analogy, in this stage, not only do I get to play the game, but now I get to make some of the calls. Maybe I even get to change the plays, if you will. But I really get to challenge what is currently established with the goal of trying to improve for the better. The biggest enemy of challenger safety, however, is success. When we do feel as if we hit success, sometimes there is a lack of encouragement around trying to challenge the status quo. As a matter of fact, as you take a look at this graphic on the screen, you might notice it looks like a lane or an alley, if you will, as these continue to get built based on more respect and more provision provided on the team. When leaders, however, create a little bit of an imbalance between respect and permission, that's when psychological safety starts to fall into what Clark calls the gutters. The first one is when I feel as if there is respect, but not permission. This is referred to as the parental gutter. It's usually described as either micromanaging or benevolent dictatorship, or even being a helicopter parent. This might be where we're helping without necessarily being invited. We might feel like we're trying to protect or shield our people when it might not be necessary. We even begin to regulate behavior, supply people with what we think they need because we don't think that they can. An example might be that I respect somebody's value, I respect their knowledge, but I don't necessarily give them the permission or the empowerment to present their findings to a senior level team because I'm afraid they can't handle the pressure. That is an example where this can start to feel a little parental. In addition, when there is permission but not respect, this starts to fall into what Clark calls the exploitation gutter. This is usually described as a toxic work environment. This is where it might feel like our leaders are extracting our value without really valuing us as people, the ones that create that value. In a stereotypical example, if you think about a sweatshop, so to speak, and this is where people might feel as if they're being bullied or harassed or even ridiculed to a certain degree. An example of this might be where I am given the permission to present at that senior level meeting. But unfortunately, in that meeting, my manager does not show the respect for my contribution. Maybe they continue to disagree with me. Maybe they continue to ask confrontational or even hostile questions, trying to get me to catch myself off guard. And as a result, I might walk away from that situation feeling exploited, and as a result, not necessarily very psychologically safe. So these different stages explore and help people really understand psychological safety and how it gets developed. But it's not a binary on-off switch, but rather it's a dynamic process that the team goes through. People in teams will move through these stages, forwards, backwards. They might even skip stages, move across different stages in different situations or contexts. But it's also useful to think about how we can create these environments of increased psychological safety and how they might show up with different groups, different cultures, different people with different backgrounds. The more you have an ability to collaborate, to work together, the more you have the ability to establish and develop psychological safety. When the safety isn't deep, unfortunately, that's where we start to get pulled into these gutters. The ultimate goal of focusing on this idea of psychological safety is to continue to increase the intellectual friction, try and get the best, most innovative ideas, while at the same time trying to decrease the social friction. So as we started to get into this in a little bit more detail, we ended up taking a look at psychological safety and starting to focus on each stage from a very practical standpoint. Specifically, we ended up outlining focus groups or breakout groups where each group was asked to discuss each of these stages and then even identify what are some of the behaviors, what are some of the actions that we can take in order to encourage it. For example, with inclusion safety, how do we think about welcoming others and embrace them for their unique capabilities? When it comes to learner safety, how do we encourage others to learn, grow? How do we continue to support them even when they make mistakes or lack some of the confidence necessary? We talked a little bit about contributor safety and what can we do as managers in order to allow people the autonomy, the independence to contribute how they want to be able to contribute in order to deliver these results. And then lastly, when it came to challenger safety, how do we invite others to challenge the status quo? How do we provide that cover for candor, if you will, and really allow people to speak truth to power? How do we encourage people to disagree, debate, innovate in a constructive manner? We went into breakout groups, and then when we came back from those breakout groups, we ended up debriefing around a couple of ideas, some strategies and techniques that we can do for each of these stages, including inclusion safety. We did the same thing, discussing some ideas and techniques around learner safety. As a matter of fact, when it came to learner safety, we ended up taking a little bit of a sidebar look at how people learn, and it's fascinating how when we become adults, that whole concept of learning changes. As a matter of fact, if you think about a baby learning to walk, usually a baby will begin by observing what's going on and eventually get to a state of walking. But it doesn't happen instantaneously. First, the baby's going to start to try and do it and then unfortunately fail and fall on their face. And then maybe they try again and they use their arm instead of their hand or their hand instead of their arm, so they make some mistakes along the way. And then maybe they end up moving up to the couch or a table and they start to stand up and take their first step, but then they fall, and it's called partiality. And while this process is going on, it is fascinating because the adults in the room are usually encouraging and supporting and telling the baby, you can do it, you've got this. But what's fascinating is, as adults, for some reason, when sometimes we see these same mistakes, these same failed attempts, or these same partiality occur, we are not as understanding, we are not as forgiving. And so this was just a good call out to make sure that as managers, we really are encouraging and supporting along the way. In addition, we also started to take a look at ways in which we can enhance psychological safety, specifically contributor safety. What are some of the things we can do in order to allow people to contribute and focus on the ways in which they want to do it in an autonomous manner? And then lastly, We touched on challenger safety and what are some of the strategies that we can take in order to encourage an environment where people feel as if they can disagree, where they can challenge the status quo and help to innovate for the better. After we did this exercise, we wrapped up this session, as we typically do, by asking, what will you do with this? And so as an interim assignment between now and the next module, there's a little bit of a worksheet where I'm asking everybody to have a conversation with your people or with your teams on psychological safety. You can do this at a team level, or you can do this as an individual level. Generally, I've found at an individual level, tend to get a little bit more candor from people. But the worksheet will have all 4 of these different stages of psychological safety. And then what I'm going to encourage you to do is ask your people to rate you or rate the team on a scale of 1 to 10 on how safe they feel in that stage. On a scale of 1 to 10, how safe do I feel to contribute? How safe do I feel to be able to learn and make mistakes? Then the follow-up question is, what can I do as a manager, or what can we do as a team in order to increase that score? I don't want anybody to think a low score is bad. The goal here is to continue to be able to develop and increase that level of psychological safety. Then next time around, that's one of the first things I'm going to ask you about. How did those conversations go? And what were a couple of things that you heard from your people around continuing to increase and develop this sense of psychological safety? As a matter of fact, when we do meet again next time, we are going to then take a look at this concept of connection conversations, which really will help set us up at the beginning of the year to have good, constructive discussions with our people around performance. So that was the talk through for this module. I look forward to seeing you again next time around.